So today we are going with the concept of ascertainment of overhead rates. See, till now we had been doing with collection, classification, allocation, apportionment, reapportionment of overhead to different production departments. Finally, we have in our story the collection of overhead expenses for different production departments. That's where we stand now. Okay, so in our previous classes, I repeat, we were discussing about how do we account for overhead cost, how do we classify that, what are the different classifications. We also learned on how to allocate, apportion or reapportion the expenses of service department to various production departments. Now finally, we are in a stage where we have the collection of overhead for different production departments. That's where we are currently standing. Okay. Now the next stage for us, as we said at the beginning, the first one is we have to compute the overhead rates. Okay, we have to go with the computation of overhead rates. And the last part of the story is we have to allocate that to each unit that have passed through in that particular department. Say, for example, if we are talking about a department which is engaged in the manufacturing of computer spare parts. Okay, so the overhead cost which we have found out should be absorbed to each unit of production of that spare part. That is what we call as absorption, because then only we would be in a position to compute the final cost of production. We will have material cost, we will have labor cost, we will have overhead cost. Then we will go with the final cost of computation of that particular product. Of course, we will have many other indirect like selling, distribution, all those expenses also will be added. Right? So we have reached to that stage. Now let's look first at how do we go with ascertainment of overhead rate. It's very simple. Overhead rate is equal to overhead of each production department. We have now production A, department A, total, the sum total of primary distribution plus secondary distribution. We have it just with us, right? So we will find out the overhead of each production department divided by number of working hours of the department. That's the simplest of it. You can also divide it with number of units produced. But here this is one method where one method of computation of overhead rate is equal to overhead of each production department divided by number of working hours of the department. One example. Later we are going to look into the detailed analysis of the same scenario. So rate is nothing but divided by unit or by number of hours or maybe other logical sequencing. So the numerator always would be overhead of each overhead cost of each department, which we have found out through our previous stages called primary and secondary distribution. I hope you are there with me. I'm moving further. Now, when we look into the absorption of overhead, absorption is nothing but you are charging your overhead cost to each unit of production. That's what I put. The process by which the factory overhead is allocated or charged to each cost unit. Factory overhead, that's what we call as the production, right? So the process by which the factory overhead is allocated or charged to each unit of production. You might have produced 100 units. And the total overhead cost might be 1,000. You need to know what is the cost, factory overhead or cost which is to be charged to each unit of production. That's where we call it as absorption of overhead. And primarily for our syllabus, we would be discussing about 6 methods of absorption of overhead. Okay, 6 methods which we would be discussing in the class. In that, the last one is very, very, very important for us. Okay, the first one is percentage on direct materials. As the name indicates, it's very clear. It's computed on the basis of direct material cost. Second, we are coming detailed into that. Okay, the second one is percentage on direct wages. As the name indicates, it would be proportion of direct wage. It would be computed on the proportion of direct wages. Then percentage on prime cost. So we know that if we are talking about percentage of prime cost, that would be total of direct materials and direct labor, right? Then, of course, we will also talk about unit of production basis, nothing but number of units produced. Absorption would be on the basis of number of units produced. Or it can be, suppose if we are talking about cement, it is maybe, sometimes they take as number of cement sack being produced, or they can also take as weight. Now, no, it can be talked about kilos being manufactured or quintal or basis, depending on the nature of that particular product. We can take it up as number of units or kilo or ton or quintal, whatever applicable. Okay. Now the next one is labor hour rate. That is number of labor working hours. Normal condition. In the normal condition, what is the number of labor hour required for the production of particular item? That's what we consider when we are absorbing the overhead on the basis of labor hour rate. And the last one, which I said is very important for us, is how many machine hours were utilized for production of one unit. How many machine hours were required for the production of this particular unit. That is the basis for absorption of overhead. So these are the 6 methods which we are going to discuss in detail. Okay. So the first one, percentage on direct materials method. In that, it is the absorption is based on percentage of direct material cost. As such, the formula would be estimated factory overhead for the period, normal, for the normal period, divided by estimated direct material cost for normal output into 100, the whole into 100. That's why I put this in brackets, the whole bracket. It's into 100. So estimated factory overhead for the period, okay, which is we have it with us, divided by estimated direct material cost for the normal output. It's very simple. As the name indicates, it would be the denominator would be based on direct material cost. When it is on percentage of direct wages, the numerator remains same, but the denominator would be on the basis of direct labor cost or your wage cost. The labor cost would be the basis of computation. So the denominator, there is a change that would be taken as direct wages or labor cost. Okay. And then we are talking about prime cost. Of course, we will take the direct material, direct labor, direct expense, if at all, if any are there, that would be taken as prime cost. And so the denominator would be prime cost, estimated prime cost. The numerator remains same. There is no change in the formula. It would be estimated factory overhead for the period, which is nothing but the total of our primary and secondary distribution summary. We can simplify that by just remembering the denominator. Okay, this can be asked both for theory as well as practical when we are thinking from the university pattern. Right. Now, the next part is unit of production basis. Here, the change in denominator will be based on number of units produced. Numerator remains the same as in all other cases. The denominator would be number of units produced. So it's very easy for us to remember. The first one direct wages, first one direct materials, denominator. Second one, it would be on direct wages or labor cost, right? Then we talked about prime cost being the denominator. Next one we discussed where number of units produced. The factory overhead would be proportion of number of units produced, right? And of course, labor hour range, factory overhead will be divided by direct labor hours. That is, the denominator would be labor hours. So that's why it is called as labor hour rate. And machine hour rate, it's nothing but, this is very important, which you have to understand. This is the most commonly used method because of the uniformity which we can observe when we are following this method. It is nothing but the rate of working one machine for 1 hour. That's why it's called as machine hour rate. Machine hour rate. So rate of working of machine per hour. That's what we call as machine hour rate. And machine hour rate would be the numerator will be same factory overhead divided by machine hours. Total machine hours work for that particular production department. Maybe A, B, C respectively. Right, so that's what we call as the machine hour. So in our today's class we were looking at the last two stages of overhead accounting, that was calculation of overhead rates, okay, and how do we go with the absorption. Absorption involves 6 methods which we have learned. The first method is the absorption of overhead based on percentage of direct materials. Second one is absorption of overhead based on percentage of direct wages. Third one, it would be based on prime cost, which is a total of direct materials, direct labor, and if at all, if there are any direct expenses, that also would be taken care. Then the next method is all about computation on the basis of unit of production. Okay, number of units produced, which can be expressed in number, in kilo, that is depending on the nature of the product. Then labor hour rate, here the denominator would be the direct labor hours. How many hours were required for labor hours were required for the production of that particular unit. That's why the denominator would be the labor hour, total labor hours taken for the production of that particular product. And the last is machine hour rate, which is, I said, it is most commonly used method, which can help us to understand, make a comparison because of its uniformity. And here, as the name indicates, it is the rate per hour, per hour working of a particular machine. So that's why the denominator would be number of machine hours involved in the production of that particular unit. That's all. Now, this is the last final stage which we would be doing.